Hello and welcome back. This is our Oasis Digital Curriculum Development session, and this is where we go over our curriculum together. We just take a look at the work that's been done, some ideas that folks are wanting to put into the curriculum. It's a completely unscripted session where we just kind of capture what we do. And so this week we've got
Lance Finney.
Paul Spears.
Zachary Kipping.
Are we doing the off camera?
Yeah, off camera. They got
disembodied voices. John Bauer.
And Rachel Mitchell.
Did you do the other record? All right, and so this is our first time doing one of these in a while. So the first thing we're going to do is just take a look at what we've been up to, take a look at some of the branches that have gone in since we've done this last, and get caught up and figure out where we are again. So that said, yeah.
Is David online?
David is not. David is
Okay.
not with us. We
Just
did not
making
forget
sure.
him.
Just
He
making sure,
just
like, oh,
isn't
God, not
here.
again.
So I did not
Alright.
forget him this
You're
week.
good.
All right, so scrolling through here. All right, I'm going to go through our normal process, is kind of go back through history, start with the oldest, and see what we can do to move things forward. All right, so we still got Cypress hanging out here. Last I knew, this was still stuck waiting for someone to like get in there and figure out what tooling we need to make this actually work as part of our automatic build process. And let's see, was there anything preventing us from using this in class? Does anyone else have any memory of where this was left off?
I do not.
No?
I know we did a bunch of things because of the,
I think
the Jasmine wasn't getting picked up correctly.
Yeah, I think we fixed that. There was problems where if you were using Karma, because we use Karma, we use Cypress, and then we don't use, and we also use Protractor now, and they actually have overlapping libraries. So we had to figure out the types.
Like Cypress
And-
and Jasmine.
I remember that conversation.
And I think we got it all worked out. I'm actually not sure what's left on this. I think that one might be good to go. So I'll have to just go through the boring review process of that and find out what we're missing to get that in. All right, here's a lint all. This is for me, apparently. I'm not sure why Kyle has made this for me, but it's a present, so sure. We got inside our pipelines, it looks like it's now compile lint all running, which lint all appears to, let's see, according to this, it deletes all the node modules for all the packages. I don't know if that's not true. Maybe?
I mean, they only free installs.
Yeah, so it yarns,
It
builds,
does not delete
lints,
anything.
tests.
I don't
That
think
comment is not accurate.
I don't think find deletes.
All right, well, clearly this is very much a work in process. All right.
Oh, it says WFE.
Yep, so we'll leave that to Kyle to keep working on. A More 8 Upgrade 2. Where are we at on these? So these, last I
Well
knew,
done, as far as I was aware.
you think these are done. Okay.
But we got to the point where we just decided to delete one of the order steps. And then that was only that was blocking me, and that was basically done.
Okay, and so we decided to delete an older step. Did we actually take action on that in here?
Yeah, because we deleted ng packager step.
Okay. So this also is just waiting for me to review, squash, merge,
Probably.
clean up, etc.
So what is this orange branch that's at the far left that you have some of these? That actually went off earlier. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
This is your discriminated unions.
but okay,
Lance is worried about the union workers.
all right,
And then discrimination.
All right.
all right. So it's actually the error handling branch. It just
Yeah,
that
like
needs to be
apparently
rebased.
discriminated unions is on top of
Okay.
error handling too. So this error handling, if I remember correctly, this was we actually had like several heated conversations about how best to do this, and the net result was let's stop arguing in circles. Let Paul get something most of the way through, and then we'll come back and argue it at that point. I never got anywhere with it.
Oh. I was looking for an argument.
Yeah, so we got to come back and do that after a while. A11Y, last I knew, this was also waiting on some more contextual input on it, but I think this might actually be good to go in otherwise.
Yeah. I can do that.
So yeah, so that one I think is just pending a deeper review, and that can get merged. All right, Legacy RxJS. So this one I know caused a lot of consternation as well. So the idea with this is that we're saying, hey, how about we go ahead and remove this old step that contains really old code and just drop in a comment telling folks that, here's what to say if it were to come up. There's been a lot of conversations off camera about the pros and cons of that, and folks are swinging back around towards let's not fix it, but let's not delete it either, and let's just leave it as it is.
As a museum piece?
Yep.
I mean,
That's most of our legacy steps.
What's that?
Most of
yeah,
our legacy steps are museum pieces.
yeah, I kind of think once they go to legacy, you just don't touch them anymore.
Unless it's a compilation error.
Yeah.
When I think part of the challenge was we actually, in order to even make this run, make it even be usable, we would have to maintain the older versions of these libraries in our kit.
What do you mean by usable? What part is actually breaking?
So nothing. So let's see. There was something. What was it? I think this came up in the context of the A11Y branch. How there were some changes that we made to the up-to-date version of this step because of the A11Y. So that sparked the conversation of, well, do we make those changes in our legacy step as well?
Is it worth the maintenance cost of keeping something that we don't actually care about, essentially?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, I think we need to. Is there something we can do to tooling? Like, what do we have that's checking accessibility to make sure that what kind of tool are we using to make sure that everything is accessible, and can we exclude legacy from whatever is running that?
So it really isn't about the accessibility to make it accessible or not. We're not automating that, and the tool is often wrong.
Okay.
So it's not really supposed to be an automated kind of tool.
Okay.
It is more that this had brought up the point of, hey, can we just get rid of this now? Instead of leaving it around and having this conversation every time something comes up. So this is actually aside from accessibility. Accessibility just highlighted the problem.
Okay. I thought there was some sort of something in our build process that was actually failing.
No.
It was just.
It's just we don't want to copy over the changes every single time.
Yeah.
We change the stuff.
I think I still fall on the side of legacy is legacy, and it's a snapshot of something we used to have, and I don't think there's a need to delete it.
Okay, so the arguments for deletion are that it does, it is similar but different to other steps that are in this way, like the A11Y stuff
Mhm.
and other improvements that we might make won't get backported to this, so it will be wrong in multiple ways as we learn to correct it better.
That's true.
Other arguments are that it also requires that we retain all of the tooling necessary to run this legacy code. So for example, the compatibility mode library, we have to ship and support that in order to even make this step run.
Do we?
Yeah.
I mean, do we need to keep it running? Or do we, that's another thing we could do with the legacy, is just here is some code we can look at, but because it's old, we don't run. If it doesn't run, it doesn't run.
I think that'll break our pipeline.
But yeah, we need to keep the library, the dependency in to have it even compile, if it's in our code base, don't we?
We also
I think he's saying it's okay if it doesn't compile.
Yeah, I'm saying take anything that
This
compiles.
isn't meant to be
anything-
an actual program.
But if
Yeah.
it doesn't compile, then we can't build. Or are you saying
We-
that's
I'm saying anything that we're using, any tooling we're using to compile everything or test everything, we put a rule in there that anything with legacy in the name doesn't get built into that. And
I
legacy
see.
code is just that. It's there to, it is a museum. It's there to look at, but we can't expect to keep these things running.
Yeah, I like that middle ground. Probably gonna ask Kyle about that since he maintains the actual machinery tooling to see what kind of pitfalls and things that we're not thinking of. But I like that idea of can we be okay with legacy things falling completely to the wayside. David Moore is not here, so I'm not sure what this is and how to get that moved forward. So we'll just talk to him next time he's around. Change detection updates. Now you guys talked about this probably the last time we did one of these classes. Is that right? Or these
Probably.
sessions?
It's been a month, wow.
Okay, and just kind of looking through here, it looks like this was still in progress. Do you remember where this was left off? Would you be able to pick it up if we wanted to talk through it?
Well, I think so. If you go to the head of this branch, let's load it up and look at 705, 707.5 and
All right.
see what it is.
So this was
707.5. So what's going on here is we have a clock at the top that is basically it's just every 100th of a second it's updating the number, and then we have this table here that just random data. I don't remember if it's 100 by 100 or whatever, how big it is. And these two are in different components that are in the same parent component, and we currently don't have OnPush change detection on, which means even though the data that's in this big table isn't changing at all, it's getting re-rendered each time. So pop up the task manager and let's look at what it's doing to the CPU.
like the operating system
Yeah.
manager here.
Yeah. So we're taking, well, other things are involved here. Oh, it was a bigger number before.
Different device.
What's that?
Different device.
Different device.
Because these
Well-
things are like, they rip through everything.
Yeah, so now it's saying, okay, 23, 24% CPU. Go into the code and so it's in data grid component is the important one. Okay, so we're on push. We have on push. So we're using about 3%. If you comment that out and let it rerun, the amount of CPU usage should spike significantly. Yeah,
wow.
now Chrome is taking
Oh, wow.
15%. And it's actually, we tried to push it even higher, but it turned out that depending upon the number of cores you're mentioning, basically we're spiking a single core completely, and it's absolutely unnecessary. It's providing no benefit. On a device like this, you might never notice. On a mobile phone, you would, because we're burning up battery power on a mobile device.
What's kind of nice is that they've actually added power usage as
That's
a
interesting. I hadn't seen
as a
that.
column. So on your mobile, this is very high.
Mhm.
And then we switch back, put this on. I don't know, it might still say very high for all I know.
Yeah, don't know how quickly it'll refresh. Nope, it's dropping down.
So there you go. There's your on-push value proposition right there.
Exactly. So it's ugly. We did not worry about styling at all. It's rough. We have to do an explanation document and all of those things.
All the boring parts.
Sure, but that is what we're proving here.
That's nice. I like that. Other than the power and processing, what other considerations, like how else would you go about like explaining what this is and why? And does the code do a good job of illustrating that, or do we need to like find more ways to pack in ideas?
Well, this is your first time looking at the code. Why don't you say?
Well,
Well, I will say we did talk about possibly doing like a console log. So every time that it got re-rendered, we would see that, and you could see the difference in how many times it got rendered by looking at the console. Kyle seemed less interested in that. He thought the power on especially on a phone, was the big thing.
yeah. So the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to open this up and see if I could inspect the DOM and actually witness any DOM refreshing thanks to the changes. So here, like something you said was that, oh, it's re-rendering these, and in fact, it's actually not re-rendering.
Well, do you have?
It's checking the bindings, but it's not actually re-rendering.
You're right. Okay,
And
I
so,
misspoke.
I'm wondering if we could visualize that by having the right life cycle do something fancy in some way.
Possibly.
Trying to think of how to do that without also affecting the change detection, because you're going to get changed after checked if you do pretty much anything in there.
Do we have, is OnPush on or off right now? I forget.
Off, on. Oh, it is on. So make sure I'm not crazy. Let's turn it back off. And if we come down here and inspect one of these, yeah, it doesn't actually update it because it knows it doesn't need to update, but it does calculate to find out that it doesn't need to. Something I think that might help with one of these is, let's see, you're getting your data here, and that's coming from this array.
Yeah, so we're creating an array of 50 by 50 of random values when the component is initially instantiated. So just the one time there.
Okay, and so where does it, its template's just right here. What's the parent on this?
App component.
Let's see, app component. And app component drops in a clock and the data grid. And the whole idea is that even though the only data that changes is over here in the clock, that it doesn't, that's still causing the change detection. Okay, so to me, like one of the core tenets of change detection is understanding whenever you're on push, what triggers that and what doesn't.
So we don't have, you're saying, why don't we have something that would push an input that would actually force it, something like that?
Yeah, like it may be like another piece of the UI or maybe somehow tie it in, but we would want to find a way to actually show, okay, yes, whenever we have on push turned on, the only way to propagate that is like, what's the downside, right? Like right now, we're only showing, oh, here's this great benefit, use on push and everything's dandy. Except if you don't know what you're doing, that kind of like breaks your Angular application, unless you know to use this immutable data pattern throughout.
It's kind of hard to break it, especially at this point in the class, because we've already taught you all the right ways to do things. Right. That's what you're trying to look for, right? Is if I turn off on push, what breaks? Like if you're doing what we've shown so far, nothing.
If I remember correctly in our discussion when we were doing this, we wanted to divide that up. That this is why to use on push, and this is not, like that. Maybe we do have a discussion of what you need to do for on push, but this is in the 700s. This is late in the game. We're not trying to do everything around on push, and so this one is focused on why you need to do it. And then the next one, change detection input, component inputs, would be more about that of the overall level and the trade backs of it, or trade offs of it. But that is also the danger of going a month without these conversations. I don't remember for sure. This is, I believe, the existing one we have. And then I think there might be a 7085 that is also new. That's part of this, but I don't remember.
I remember looking at this the first time and it's not one that you can just jump into and start explaining.
Right.
But also, I mean, that clock is not either. Like, I can imagine the first time I load that, all right, there's a clock. So we need to do more to be helpful to the instructors to explain what you need to do to see a difference. And that the difference you're going to see is in Task Manager, which otherwise we never look at. It's just not part of our thing.
Yeah, so this is...
So what are we looking at here?
So we have an array of data that keeps having items added to it.
Yeah.
And it's showing what change detection strategy. It switches between components that have different change detection strategies.
And Chris really wanted to emphasize a difference. Unfortunately, she's not here, but she had a strong dislike of the fact that in the data source, talked about both mutated arrays and, could you look at the dropdown for mutated, or the data source?
Oh, okay.
That the observable through async, she felt that those apples and oranges, that like looking at two different types of arrays is something, you are comparing an immutability issue there, but then when you're doing an observable async, it's kind of at a different level. I don't remember all of the details. I remember she convinced Kyle of the concern, but I couldn't reproduce that conversation.
I think I see what you're getting at. It's not 3 options you should have in a dropdown. It's 2 different examples.
Yeah, and so I think part of the reason that there was this 7085 is let's separate those conceptually, and so maybe there would be the 2 different types of array as a step, and then async as a step, and kind of breaking it down into more things.
Yeah, because I didn't think about the array, but it makes sense. So the example I thought of was the async pipe, because if you're manually subscribing and pulling the data out and doing on push, you're not going to see the changes. But if you're using the async pipe, you will see the data as it comes through the observable.
It depends what you do to the observable. If you take the value out of the observable and mutate it without actually changing the instance in the observable, nothing's ever going to happen, which is I think what Zachary was looking at with a different branch, because our example with the acknowledge all employees in the subjects and services, we take something out of a behavior subject and then take an array out of a behavior subject, push onto that array, and then next that behavior subject back in, and it works. And it only works accidentally because we're not using OnPush. If you use OnPush, the change detection will look at that and say, all right, well, you pushed in the same thing that I had before. It has no reason to see that anything has changed. That actually nexting into it is useless. It has no effect whatsoever. And so it's, OnPush and observable, or async and observable doesn't do everything for us. You have to still be smart about what you're doing with what's in your observable. But I don't know how to get all of that into our curriculum.
I'm not sure I'm following.
Well, I don't know if that's a tangent or if we want to go down that.
Well, yeah, so I think for what we've got in front of us, the OnPush branch that was added is making a change to 7075, introducing that. I think that one probably could be added as it sits, because this is in and of itself a valuable step.
Does it have the explanation filled out?
I don't think so.
But I think that's
All right, here, uncomment this line and compare in Task Manager.
Okay.
I mean, if
I didn't see the Task Manager part.
If random instructor, saw this show up tomorrow in class, would they know what to do with it strictly with what's here?
No.
So also,
There's not a lot. Well, I mean, there are 3 components to look through. I mean, you're looking through 3. If you're just pulling this up for the first time, trying to figure out what's going on, there are 3 components to look through to find line 12. I guess maybe if you know it's a change detection, you're looking for that change detection line. It shouldn't be too big of a deal. I think it's probably fine.
What's an explanation MD?
What about it?
What is in it right now?
It actually took the stuff from 708.
Okay, so
That's what
that
it
was
in here.
If we have a verbiage in here that says go look at data grid component TS for what you need to change, that might be enough, because if anyone just pulls it up, they should be trained that the way they figure out what on earth is going on here is look for an explanation file.
So unfortunate behind the scenes thing about that is that historically that goes in the instructor.md file, not explanation.
Oh,
but we're
true.
trying to find a way to healthily marry those two.
Yeah, I got that
Also,
wrong. I got that
historically,
confused.
People don't pull up instructor.
Either one, right?
Yeah. Also, as a side note, compared to using the Task Manager, do you remember how long it takes to do a Google profile, like the console profile?
What do you mean how long it takes?
Like if
to
you go
run a
into
performance monitor? Not very.
So would that be a potential alternative to using Task Manager? Because we could actually see the.
I mean, sure, if you're very familiar with how to use it and
what it means.
And how to interpret that, and how to interpret that to a class of people.
Yeah.
Like having it boil down to a single number is really, really great. Like that is a very effective tool.
Right. I was just thinking because we can see the paints on the screen.
Yeah,
That's just me, I guess.
but you're not going to get paints.
Oh yeah, I guess you can.
It doesn't change.
It would still, I guess, whatever. You'd have to go deep into them. You could still see the calculation.
Yeah, you can see on the flame chart. You can see. Yeah, here I'm calculating all of these additional change detection.
That's too deep.
Yeah. All right. So yeah. So I don't think it was right to completely remove that from here. Especially when we're in the 700s and we're jumping around, we should probably duplicate the explanation. And so if we revert that and then add a little bit of instruction to instructionist, I think this one could be ready. All right, proposed master, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, this was taking stuff that we were already working on, right? Or did this?
Yeah, this got in. Yeah, this is going to be good. We just need Paul to look at it and improve it and put it in.
Yep. And this was our not enabled is not the same as disabled thing. Is that what this is?
No.
No,
No,
that's
this is
a
a
different
different one.
conversation. This is just the fact that currently there's no reason to set the class as disabled since the disabled binding automatically applies a class to materialize.
Gotcha.
So
With a different styling library, it
Yeah.
does matter, but not
Right.
with the styling library we have.
Gotcha.
exactly. But we decided that previous steps already showed off the class.
All right. So I don't remember if we've talked about the equivalent change on the other source file for this one in the past. So Zachary, if you would go ahead and for the camera walk us through this change, because I think this one's good. It just needs an explanation as to why we're making the change.
Yeah, so this one, the main change was, at least in this file, because there's another file just like it, we are doing a system where we have a private variable that houses some data in our service, and then eventually we want to, oh yeah, that thing, yeah. We want to eventually push down some data to a component through a behavior subject. And we have a few buttons actually, because you scroll up you can see all the other functionality. Or not, never mind.
Nope, not here.
Because it just cuts it off, that's all. But, yeah, so it's like acquisition and accall. So essentially what happens is we have buttons on the UI that if we click, it would run one of these two functions. But currently the functions basically just mutate the local data and then next that down to the component. And like Lance mentioned slightly earlier, like the reason that's kind of working is because we don't have OnPush. And realistically, we're just pushing down the same reference ID down. Versus if we did the spreading, like we're not completely immutable because we're not changing the object references underneath, but we're at least changing the overlying array reference ID, so the component will at least get a new array every single time, so it knows to re-render if it needs to.
Yeah, and this is what I was talking about earlier when John wasn't following me. It was this step in particular.
Now, my memory's terrible. Don't we have a step that is?
We have NGRX store immutability, but not
okay.
immutability with just pure behavior subjects.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I think what we had discussed in the past was, do we actually want to couple the immutability story with this one, or do we want to leave it out? Like, which NGRX step do we want this to be equivalent to, I think was the question.
For me, it was like also that, and then also it's just like, the code that's currently there is code that I would never write. And I end up rewriting it every single time I come to this step. I'm just like, this is just silly.
And what I do with this when I'm teaching is I'll show it this way and go through at the end and I'll say, by the way, there's something that's kind of like a bug, and I'll put it on push. And then I'll show them that it doesn't work and that I have to change this code to get it to work if you want to do on push. But without the other step, the clock step, like there's what they might get out of that is, well, I don't want to use on push. So it's the combination of I want to use on push because it's going to make things better in this and that way, but this code is wrong if I do that. So I need that combination.
If this is example code, then like people might not ever go onto NGRX in terms of like, oh, they come back to our cooking later just to view it as an example.
Mm-hmm.
They might not go onto NGRX if they're not using it. And this is an example of just doing services as state. So giving that example of just mutating the data.
I can tell John has feelings over
I have
there.
other feelings about this step in general.
Just in general?
Yeah, I don't know that I want to interrupt the current thought process, but I have other things about this that come up pretty much every time I teach this, and that's that we're exposing the behavior subject.
Yeah, there's that too. I think Lance and I have
so,
talked about this before too.
Yeah, I often make a change to this to make the behavior subject private and expose the as observable, which is another way of making it analogous to RxJS or NGRX.
I actually tried to work on a branch that did that once, and I ran into some problem, and it just wasn't working, and so I abandoned the branch. So if you can do it, that's great. I don't know what my problem was that time. But yeah, I agree. Like exposing the
Well,
subject
Yeah,
is not
and
great.
then we don't really need the private array,
Yeah.
because you can just pull the value out of the behavior subject,
That
mutate
too.
it, and then
Yeah.
push it back in.
Yep.
Not mutate the end.
Hmm?
Don't mutate the end.
Well, yeah. Pull the value out, use it to make the new value,
Yeah.
and then push it back in. Because that's the other thing, when you make the as observable, now you have 3 properties for the same thing. It, what I, it seems like whenever I teach this step, it turns into, I'm trying to explain why you would do something different, why there are tools that do it better than this, but it turns into questions from the class that dive way too deep into changing this to make it a little bit better.
That's kind of interesting because it's one of those things where like, I don't do any of the things that you guys are describing. And it's not because they're not good to do. It's probably just because I have a different kind of agenda when I teach this stuff. And that my agenda is to show this in comparison to the steps leading immediately up to it. Like the steps leading immediately up to it are like using components and inputs and outputs to achieve the same functionality. And so like my focus here is only in showing that comparison and contrast and comparing and contrasting that to be able to say, hey, now look how we have our state centralized. Like maybe I'm doing too much hand waving around the hows and whys of what it achieves there. But
Well, maybe you're skipping, you actually mentioned this before, I actually talk about how this is meant to be an immutable state, but it's not, because of the fact that we're exposing the behavior subject. Anybody who has access to it can mutate it. And so I go that step farther to actually make it immutable.
yeah.
Well, you're not actually making it immutable. Well,
From the components that consume it, if all you expose is the as observable.
but if they're getting an observable of an array, then once you get that array, if you get an array out of an observable, you can change that array, and it's changing it in the observable itself.
But they couldn't change it from the perspective of like other subscribers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
No, I
if-
mean like they couldn't push new values.
You're right. They couldn't
Yeah.
push a new value into the observable, but they could change what all the other.
Sure.
It's like if you have OnPush turned off and you are subscribing to a shared observable, depending upon how it's set up, you may have to share it. Because if it's actually replayed creating a new object, you would get a different array reference. But if you have a shared observable, 2 subscriptions to it, and 2 different branches of components, and one of them goes and adds an element to that array, with change detection turned off, changing that, if you trigger change detection, it's going to cause it to reevaluate on both halves, causing that change to actually reflect in the other branch. And so, yeah, the only way to do that is to make a new array that you push in.
And then in this case, it works fine because what we're putting in the array are strings, which are by themselves immutable. But if this were an array of objects, then we've just deferred the problem one step
Yep.
down in the.
And so, hard problem to solve because of all these things. Like we can address all of these things,
Yeah.
but we would be trying to address all of them in a step that, like, all we're trying to do is try and teach you how to, take your state and centralize it.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure, like that. I think that was actually the trouble that you ran into, was probably me or possibly Kyle. I remember you trying to make a branch that went in and solved these problems,
Yeah.
and like, and you did, but it was like, yes, but now for the purposes of teaching, like I don't know if this is generically better for anyone who comes across this step. And so, yeah, I'm maybe,
But-
I think the answer is to like go back to the drawing board on how we tell the overall arc and story of it.
I mean, but both Zachary and I have looked at this and said we need to improve it in a particular way. So this is going to keep coming up. Like maybe it's going back to the drawing board. Maybe it's turning our entire course into immutable JS bootcamp. 3 days? I think we could do it.
Yeah, so,
I would actually be in favor of, well, I need to go back and look at the curriculum again, see if what I'm thinking about already exists. Is this the first time we talk about using services to share state?
Yes.
Let me chew on that a little bit longer.
Let's double check, make sure I'm not forgetting
Pretty sure it
something.
was. One time we used state services prior, but it's for grabbing HTTP stuff.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we introduced services all the way in 300, but
Yeah.
for our local application-wide state, I'm looking at the wrong folder set.
Because I might want to step back on what I said about wanting to make it immutable and only expose those ACOL method and the observable piece itself. Because sometimes it's perfectly fine to store your state in a subject that your components have access.
Yeah, and I think that was my initial choice there was like, you know what? Yeah, there are pros and cons. And generically speaking, we'd probably go a different route of not exposing it as a behavior subject.
Mm-hmm.
But like for the scope of what this step is doing, like it is not harmful necessarily to have kept it as simple as we did. But yeah, if you have time to go down the path of discussing that nuance in our very full 3 days, then yeah, that'd be a great place to take them. But I don't want to necessarily prescribe that be the thing that we have to talk about at that moment in time. Because this is coming up, near the end of the class and how to handle all these trade-offs and nuances.
Well, I mean, that's what we are talking about here in the 600s is the different ways of managing state. And we don't have that simple example of what if you just need a bucket in a service somewhere.
Yeah.
If we're doing a bunch of hand waving anyways, like in terms, like not like full on hand waving, but like kind of skipping over like the minor details, does it matter if we have like it done the proper way?
Well,
If we're just talking about the story in general,
well, the problem is that
or do we just want the code so simplified that you don't have to do it?
like the proper way is literally dependent upon what the next point the instructor wants to get across. Is the point of not doing anything here.
Yep.
It depends on which subtle little additional piece of functionality do you want to add to the story next will determine what the proper way is. Because like right here, you've made it immutable, and that helps if you're going to use OnPush, but maybe that's not what maybe we're intentionally not doing that depending upon the next feature that we put in. Like we are historically like we're usually always doing that on purpose, and maybe that is always the right way, but I don't know. Not 100% convinced. And so the other challenge is that this is only part of the story because, is this right? No, because you can never have just an array of string literals. So it's like it is only right because our example is simple. The second we add any kind of real data, it's back to being wrong. We have to add another layer of nuance. And so, yeah, anyway, hard problem. And this particular solution has been introduced a couple of times now as, hey, can we at least make that give us back a new array? And so I'm warming up to that idea as a starting point. Does it detract from the other stories that we try to tell with this step, like the next pivots that we take?
I don't think it does. Is there a reason that code was commented out in this branch?
I was doing it mid-class.
Okay.
I touched the branch at all.
See, my only hesitation with making this default starting point is that this does provide a distraction for how the point I'm trying to get across as the baseline for this step, which is like, oh, and at the point in which we call this push, like that. Well, wait, where is your push? You update it. Oh, and then you call next. Okay.
Next.
I think next is the thing that you're explaining.
And then you next, and the next is the thing that I'm typically explaining, and so 30 unfortunately becomes a distraction because consuming that over line 29 is surprisingly difficult for students, especially with this being the first touch of immutability.
I mean, I go over object spreading way earlier, but
yeah, I mean, really, you're talking about the difference between. I mean, you're on both 29 and 30. You're talking about that array that you have, not the behavior subject, and so you're just talking about the difference between pushing an item into an array or assigning a new array to it. Yeah. I don't know where I talk about spreading.
Yeah, like
Yeah, I think
it
it
doesn't
comes
come
up.
up because curriculum makes us bring it up.
I don't talk about it because of curriculum.
But
I
if
talk
I
about
don't,
it because
I mean, it was in one of the next steps.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the thing is, with the code as it currently is, because of how line 29 exists, old line 28 is actually superfluous. It's a red herring.
Old line 27.
No, old line 28, current line 32.
Old line. Okay.
The next is absolutely superfluous. It has no effect because you're just pushing the same object back onto the observable and it has no
I
effect.
see.
That's
Unless
not.
you have, like,
That's
this-
not true.
Yeah.
Because that would trigger all the operators in the
Trigger
pipeline.
operators, as long as you don't have
Yeah.
a distinct.
Okay, that's all right. I think
For OnPush.
okay, there are some cases where it makes it irrelevant and other cases where it doesn't. Okay.
Right.
It's a discussion I don't want to have in this step.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm getting at. Is like
Well,
very like we step one toe off the path and we're off into the weeds with discussions that are not the point of this
but I
stuff.
think I'm with Lance that the old way of doing it is the way that lends itself to the discussion I don't want to have.
Because
The
like
new way is
yeah, because you see the old way, it's like actually there's a problem here. The new way, it's like yep, this is good.
But that's not true at all.
the new way I'm pushing a new array down. The old way I'm mutating the array and then pushing the same array down again, which is weird.
it's also this way
Yeah.
slightly more
Mhm.
analogous with how NGRX does it too, because it like gives you the current state of the world, you change it, and then hand back a new state of the world.
Well, and this is not necessarily.
It's
to
not
mirror
up to
that.
the level yet, but
But yeah, no, I can see how it's weird on it. Causes the problem from the other side.
Yeah.
Like the problem that you're describing of it's weird to, take an array and then put it back in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side of that, it is weird that like I've already got an array. Why can't I just modify that array and use it? Like why do I need a brand new one? Like I pushed it in there.
Well, I mean
maybe we get rid of the private array.
yeah.
And only use dot value.
No, definitely not doing that. Because I don't ever want anyone to use dot value to get a value out of behavior subject. Like you're not supposed like like that is an accident in my opinion. That you can do that.
Is it?
Yes.
That's another.
Yes, that is an accident.
Okay. I'm gonna go rewrite some code.
Yeah, me too.
I was like, hey, cool, I don't have to keep local state anymore. But
yeah, that's an accident. So let's see. Yeah, I could be convinced that that can be our new starting point. So yeah, just go ahead and clean up the class isms.
Yeah.
All right.
So we're going for 40 minutes here.
So we'll go ahead and cut that one here, and we'll start a new video.